I am going to extend my discussion of anger because I realize as I am meeting with clients and trying to understand their behaviors and working with clients, how important this topic of anger is. In fact, just this week, I presented a 2-day workshop called Ignite Your Anger, the Power of Your Anger to Create Positive Change. And what we did, I want to share a bit of that with you and doing something unusual, share some of the slides that I had for this presentation. So, to introduce this topic of anger, I had people go through exercises to learn, to look back in their childhood experiences, what anger did to them, how they were affected. So, if, like in my home, there was virtually no anger, I didn't see people fighting, and my parents were so introverted and quiet, I didn't see anger except for 3 times when my father exploded with anger, but not against anyone. An example is that I was working as a, I don't know, 10-year-old, 12 maybe, on a project using indelible India ink on a table on the living room wool carpeting, new. And he said to me, make sure you are watchful of the ink. And wouldn't you know it, I spilled it. He picked up that India ink bottle and threw it across the room. He didn't say anything to me. That was his anger coming out. There were 2 other episodes like that, and that is all that I knew of anger. Another incident that stands out, when I was even younger, I heard my father's mother, my grandmother, say to my mother, she's a habutembo, which in Japanese means a powder, you know, that sort of thing. Well, I didn't, I knew that was a criticism, and I got the message. No pouting, no showing of that kind of dissatisfaction and anger. So that affected me in a way that I grew up suppressing anger. When I was bullied as a teenager, where a group of friends thought that I was mistreating my best friend, prevented me from contacting her, caught me after school and tried me and found me guilty. They bullied me. And did I respond with anger or any kind of protest? No. At that time, you see, I was involved in a fundamentalist Christianity, and somehow I absorbed the message that you're supposed to forgive. So I took on the air of forgiveness and easily didn't pay attention to any anger I might have felt, although it came out sideways as I looked back on the situation. However, what it was important for me to see was that I did not have my anger because some spiritual idea that it was not a good thing to do. Then, when I was 6 years into my first marriage, my husband one day came home and told me that our marriage was now open, meaning that he could sleep around. So it was a justification for what he was already doing. That was the first time I felt really angry, but just for 24 hours. I remember when I turned that anger off when I was just beating him with my anger, beating not that hard with my anger. He said, "You're not being rational." And that was enough. You see, I had been using my intellect my whole life rather than coming from my heart. And when he said intellect, rational, I turned all my feelings off. And what it did to me was put me in retreat, in a depressed state, really. And I tolerated two more affairs in the succeeding 3 to 5 years. But I didn't react because I was numbed and depressed. And that is sort of my short tale about anger. So, what we do first is to discover how you were affected by anger in your home. Some may have reacted with, "I'm not going to do that. That is so hurtful. I can see that my father is hurting my mother." Or the anger exploding out in a punishing father to some children who physically beat their child. The message there is that anger is extremely hurtful, and the child feels such rejection, such pain, that the child may bury the anger and never to do that to anyone. Whatever the situation is, to assess what happened to you in angry situations. That's step one. Step two is to figure out how now is your attitude toward anger so that you can assess your relationship to this very important emotion. And I'll explain why in a short while. So you've got the picture. Now, to avoid anger, I showed the group the ways that you avoid anger, and I'd like to bring out slides for that, which I will share with you. I am trying to make this big. There you go. Patterns that people adopt to avoid anger is suppression. That's what I did. And that's why, for most of my life, I was never angry. If you want to avoid anger, you're certainly going to avoid conflict. Because what are conflicts about? People disagreeing, getting angry, because each person feels they're right and they're going to defend that position, regardless of how aggressively it's done. Another pattern to avoid anger is people pleasing. If you are taking care of people's needs, pleasing them because you need their approval or their love, you don't want to ruffle any feathers. You make sure everyone's happy. That's a pattern you can adopt to avoid anger. Or you can get into self-blame, where you blame yourself for anything that goes wrong. Well, you made a mistake. That's why it's happening. You didn't fulfill your responsibility well. And that's why this is happening. Not being able to put anger in the right place, but rather having the anger turn against you. Another is being overly accommodating, never disagreeing. Everything's okay with me. Sure, that's fine, because you don't want to utter an opinion, utter a different stance, because it might bother someone, and that might create anger. So That's that list. And here's another list, numbing out. So instead of feeling angry, you just numb out. You you might even call it a PTS syndrome of um, fight, flee, or freeze. So you freeze. Another way you avoid expressing or feeling your anger is shutting down. One way of shutting down is walking away in your mind, and you just are not responsive anymore. You're not adding to the fuel. Or you shut down in terms of saying, I don't need to see this person anymore. This friendship is over. And rather than talking about it and talking about what's going on, you just shut down and remove yourself. Another pattern is perfectionism. You do things, you are trying to keep a high bar in making things perfect. So there is no place where someone can be angry with you because you're doing things perfectly. You're being as perfect as you can. So there's no argument about you. Perfectionism is also about not making mistakes. So it's pressure to make sure that you know your situation, your responsibility, and the people around you, so you don't make mistakes. So no one's angry. And then the last one, passive aggressiveness, is psychologically a complicated one. It's where the individual who's passive aggressive is unconscious about the anger that's being evoked. And because it's not available, the energy of anger comes out in a kind of aggressiveness that they won't own. The other person will feel it, but the individual who is passive aggressive wouldn't feel it. For example, someone who is passive aggressive may be resisting any suggestion and maybe trying to take over a situation, but he or she isn't doing it consciously. They're just kind of pushing to have their way. And the other person can feel that angry energy of push. But the person who's pushed down their anger doesn't feel it. So these are some of the patterns that are used to avoid anger. And what is the first anger? It's when a parent wasn't there consistently or in a meaningful way when you needed that parent for comfort, for safety, for nurturance, getting out a wet diaper, needing a bottle, and no one came. And you might have started crying as a protest in the crib, crying and crying. And what you experienced was no one there. So even your anger, what was not witnessed, and you might have been exhaustion, just quitting, and learn to the idea that your anger has no effect, has no power. So this is some of the story about anger and the need to um, acknowledge and see more and more how this neglected emotion, buried emotion, uncomfortable emotion needs attention. I don't know whether the next slide is going to be helpful. So get the picture that anger is your heart saying no. No, my needs are being ignored. So if by listening to your anger, you're listening to your heart and aligning with your heart, and that is significant in changing your internal world. Moreover, since the anger is one of the triggers of the inner child, anger is really important to address. And so I wanted to have this extended discussion of anger. So you will see how important it is in terms of inner child healings, in terms of the beliefs. When no one came, the belief came, I am alone. And that soon can lead to, I must not be important, not good enough. So the beliefs, and you saw the strategies that went along with that. So that's my extended discussion on anger. Please write your questions and comments below, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you for being with me.